Hey friends, Christy here with Little Roots Ranch, and I'm at the very front of the farm, so I don't think the turkeys can hear me. But anyways, happy September, happy fall. Motorcycle going by. It is September, and as many of you know, this year I grew tomatoes outside of my greenhouse, and boy did I pick a bad year to run that little experiment. Our early summer was very cold, or cool, whatever, and rainy, and though some of the plants loved it, the tomatoes were not one of them. So like many of you, it is now September and I have green tomatoes. Well, actually, I take that back. I have 3 red tomatoes of the Juliets behind me, and yes, I do need a ladder. I'll tell you about that later. But I know one of the biggest things, my cherry tomatoes are doing great. I've been picking off of them. You know, obviously they're smaller. They're pretty easy to ripen up. That's why I always recommend growing a cherry tomato, just because you get that satisfaction earlier, and that's, for a gardener, that's such an amazing thing to have. But for our larger tomatoes or our sauce tomatoes, and especially if you're not growing in a greenhouse, sometimes we can end up having a lot of green tomatoes. And this year was especially brutal for many of us. But, oh, sorry, my watch was going off. This year was especially brutal for many of us, but I want to take you along and show you where my tomatoes are at and things that I'm doing to help ripen them up. I will say in advance, there are many different options, but I'll show you the ones that I'm going to employ, and I hope they help you with your garden, and I hope you get some red tomatoes. So September tomatoes, here we come. I'm going to show you the tomatoes first, and then I'll show you what I'm doing. Just a moment. Okay, so this monstrosity are my tomatoes. I'm not lying to you. In order to get to the top of the tomato plants, I legitimately need a ladder, which is kind of a cool problem to have. But what I have here are millions, well, maybe not millions, but definitely over 100 tomatoes, and they're all green, -3. And then my cherry beds are over there. I'll show you those, but I think today's main topic is going to be about the main tomatoes. So all of these ones here, this is my Juliet patch, and it's a 4 by 24 foot raised beds, raised about 1.5 feet. And then of course, you know, I don't know, 6 feet, 7 feet, 8 feet of tomatoes. But what I have here, so I'll show you first my few red ones that I have down there. I'm so proud. Those are the only ones. My other ones are, see if they're starting to blush a little bit. Blushing means where they turn a little bit of red at the bottom. And I don't have any ones to show you that are starting to, oh, maybe this one. You can see this color's changed a little bit. But usually if you look on the shoulders, it's a little more visible, or on the bottom. Now, granted, it's hard because this one's in the shade, but you can tell he's less green than the other ones. And that's important because when the tomatoes first start growing, they are very bright green. Let's see, here's some more here. They're very bright green, and then they slowly go to a lighter green, and then they move into an orange, and then of course they move into red. So as you can see here, I have so many tomatoes, just tomatoes everywhere that I can look. Moving around the ladder here, just so many tomatoes, but they're all, every single one of them are green, which is a big bummer. Look at all those tomatoes inside. Like I said, I have hundreds of tomatoes, but unfortunately, they're just not ripe. But I do have a lot of tomatoes. I'll take you over here. I've got some bigger tomatoes. Let's see here. And then through here, let's see. This is the back here. Again, lots of tomatoes. And then over here I've got, ooh, I'm sorry, I've got one more red one. Mark that down. I don't know if you guys can see, but there are so many tomatoes in here. Let's see. There we go. Just lots. Oh, I see another red one down there. Well, maybe I need to get in here a little bit better and stop discouraging all of them. But I've got just a bunch of tomatoes, but most of them are all green. So I'll show you what to do with those in just a second. I also, ooh, strawberries. I also want to show you my cherry tomatoes just because figured I'd show you where I'm at. I know a lot of you like following along with my journey. So this is my other tomato bed. On the right are my determinants, and on the left are my cherry tomatoes. So there's 2 rows within this one bed, if that makes sense. So these are, I think, early girl here. These are my cherries on the back. Almost all of them are, oh, what are they called? I can't believe I'm not thinking of it right now. Oh, the orange ones. I talk about them all the time. Sun golds. There we go. All of them are sun gold. And then here I've got just random either tomatoes that friends have given me or for whatever reason. The showing isn't as great. This area gets a whole lot of shade. The shades seem to work really well for the smaller tomatoes. Not so great for the bigger tomatoes. You can see I've got some turning there. Some more tomatoes here. There's some beautiful tomatoes right there. And of course, as you're noticing, they're all really green. Cherry tomatoes, it's like I said, they've been doing great because I've been picking them. So you only see a few, but there's been a whole lot of them. But let me show you what I'm doing and other options. Okay, I'm back. So as I showed you, I've got a lot of tomatoes and the vast majority of them are green. And so, as I mentioned earlier, the tomatoes start off obviously as a flower, and then they start to grow a little baby tomato, depending on what size you're growing. And they get larger and larger, but they're still a really deep green color. And then if you're paying attention, you'll notice that they move to kind of a light green color, and then into an orange, and then into red, assuming you're growing red tomatoes, obviously. And then also to keep in mind, there are of course 2 different types of tomatoes that you can grow. And by that I mean they're growing habits, and that's determinate and indeterminate. Now indeterminate was the first bed I showed you, those ones that are really, really tall. And technically, like if I lived in like in the South, like California or into like Mexico or whatever, I could technically, they would just keep growing. They don't grow them as annuals. I mean, they can, but they, you know, will keep growing and keep producing. Same with peppers. But all of us who live up here, you know, unless you do a special thing to keep them going during the winter inside in like a dormant state, they're not going to make it. They, you know, won't deal with the frost and all of that stuff. So those are the indeterminate, which means that they can just keep growing and growing and growing. Determinate means that their growth is determined. So for the most part, for determined, we just want to let those go. For the most part, they all put up their fruit at the same time. It's great for canners and people like to prepare food or sell or whatnot, because you don't go through and get, oh, tomato, tomato, tomato. It's just boom, all your tomatoes are ready, which is really awesome. But I'm going to speak mostly about the indeterminate tomatoes, and then I'll circle around with a few tips for the determinate tomatoes, though I think most of you are growing indeterminate tomatoes. So with those, there are a lot, I've heard of a lot of different things, from crazy stuff like stressing the plant and to try and get it to produce faster. So in order to think about how to get a tomato to do what we want it to do, we need to think of its goal in life and its goal in life and its, oh, what was the other thing? I'm failing today. It's too hot. I can't think. I'll get to its goal in life. The goal in life of any plant, right, is to produce offspring and to keep its species alive and things like that. And then obviously tomatoes create a delicious tomato to lure in, you know, in the wild or whatever, to lure in animals and birds and things like that to spread the tomato plant. So the tomato plant grows itself so that way it can produce the tomatoes. Makes sense, right? Well, the tomato wants to take its time to produce it, right? But a lot of times what people do is they like to stress the tomato, because if a tomato plant feels like a little bit of stress, it'll put more emphasis on hurrying up and getting some viable seed before the circumstances or the weather or whatever becomes unfavorable. The other thing that I was gonna say is knowing where your tomato is at in its growth cycle, and also knowing like what's the best way, you know, understanding other things, because you can stress it by, I've seen people who like are rough and abrasive with their tomatoes, but then there's also things like pruning, which I'll show you. Top pruning is something that I do. Removing the flowers, knowing what stage your tomato's in. As far as we mentioned earlier, indeterminate will keep growing. That means that it'll keep just producing flowers right up until the first frost. And knowing how your tomato is using the energy that it has, right? So there's several options, several things people, like I said, will like hit their tomato plants or spray them with different concoctions or whatever. And I personally don't do any of those. What I do is flower removal, trimming the terminal growing end, and then harder pruning and reducing water. The one that I don't do that some people do, and for me it just isn't really viable, but when you think of pruning, there's always top and bottom pruning. And I think in general, people only think about pruning the top, but you can also actually bottom prune. And what that means is using a shovel to prune the roots. I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of times it's done with like trees and different plants and stuff where you want to keep the top, but not grow it larger. And so instead of pruning the canopy, you can prune the roots and it accomplishes the same thing. If that's something you're interested in, what you want to do is take a shovel and kind of make like a little moat, I guess, like dig down. You'll fill the dirt back in, but just to kind of sever the roots about a foot out to kind of stress the plant a little bit. Now that's not what I do, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Mostly I don't have any ability. You saw my tomatoes, they're crazy. There's no way I'm getting in there. If you have like one plant or something, that's a more viable option. So getting back to the 4 things I do use is, I'll talk about water first. So reducing water. So that doesn't necessarily mean just stopping water, especially if you have been giving your tomato plants lots and lots of water. You don't want to stress them too much where they just drop fruit. That's not going to get you anywhere. But kind of over the period of 2 weeks, just reducing your water a little bit or watering less. Like for me in Stanwood, I have not watered anything since we had the rains last week. I think the 23rd was the last rain we had. I also, one thing to note is I generally water less than other people, and that's because, as you can tell with my mass of tomatoes, is my ground is covered, right? So the sun isn't beating the moisture out of the ground. I also water really, really deep, and these are very established plants. Now there are a lot of complexities to water, but basically consider reducing your water. That's what I'm doing. The other thing is to prune it up. And what I mean by that is I, like every year, am lacking on my bottom pruning. Now, again, this is for indeterminate tomatoes and not determinate. And so what that means, and I'll take you and show you that, and then I'll show you the top pruning. But what that means is I'm gonna go through, and now remember, my plants are larger, so I can take more room. The amount you take off will be proportionate to the size of your tomato plant. If it's really small, you might want to leave it or just pinch off like a few of the branches or whatever. But I could take 3 feet off and my plants wouldn't have a problem. But I think ideally I would go for 2. And so what that does is, one, as we are entering September and there's more rain, it's colder, like the fog, even the dew point, and like moisture is just everywhere. And so you don't really want your tomatoes, of course the stem, but you don't want everything coming down and touching the ground. Now that's what I have. And so I need to correct that. But also when you take the stems off, the tomato plant receives that as I'm being eaten, or there's a threat, or my predator is active now, and so I'm going to put more resource to the plant. There are several ways to do it. I personally just, unless it's really huge, I just break them off. And the reason for that is because I don't clean my shearers. Maybe I could do that and then I wouldn't have a problem, but I don't have like the alcohol or peroxide or whatever it takes. And so I just pop them off. Also, I like that because then I'm not actually cutting or touching where I have split the plant. Like, so if I use loppers or something like that, snips, and I cut it, there is contact if I've touched any other plant or different things. When I break the tomato stem off with my hand, nothing actually touches there, and in my opinion, reduces the ability for disease and stuff like that. Though I am end of year, I'm not necessarily worried about that, but that's a good tip to have in general. Your hands will be stinky and turn a little green, but who doesn't love a tomato smell? So I will bring you around and show you exactly what I mean by that. And then I'll show you what I mean by clipping the terminal ends and the buds. So just one moment. Okay, so right now we're up close and personal with the tomato plant. And so I'm gonna show you basically everything that is not producing fruit here will get snipped off. So if you have a wild tomato and it's not so easy, like right now I cannot see the trunk of any of the tomato plants. So what you kind of need to do is kind of just go through, and it might have a few, and you just start working your way. So, and you can tell if it has fruit or not on it. And so like these things, I just pulled off right there, and I'll keep doing that. If some of these are in your way, like this one here, even though it's not technically at the bottom, I just turn that like that, pop that right off. And see, that's where I was telling you, I didn't touch, that was connected to the plant. I didn't touch that. And so I don't have to worry about introducing disease or whatever. But basically all of these, so you kind of follow it back, like see this one here? I follow it back. It's hard to get it on camera because it's hard for my eyes to see. There we go. So you see this one right here where my finger is, and it connects right there. So I'll just snap it down and up. And so it creates a clean line. Took the sucker with it too. And then I just drop that down. And so see how that's a little bit more open? And then I can take this one here. Same thing, it's smaller, so I just push it down. It comes out and it's starting to open a little bit more. I'll do a few more. So there's this one. He's gone. This right here is getting in my way. So I try and follow him up. There's one right here. Let's see. One right here. And then over here. And see how that's really opening up since we started. And sometimes if I can't get all the way back, I'll take it off at the halfway point, which I thought I was gonna do with that one, but it's being a little harder. There we go. So this, I didn't take it all the way back. I'll get to it once I have a little bit more of a clearance, but it takes a minute. See, then there's all this, so I just follow it back. See where it connects to that root right there? And just go ahead and pop that off. And already look how much more it's opening up. Now I'm gonna put it on fast mode and do this section and then come back and show you. So just a moment. So here, of course, it goes a lot faster because it's in fast mode, but honestly, once you get the hang of it and get in there, and it's just snap, 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 and it makes it a lot easier to keep it safe from water, as well as prune it up and help ripen those fruits, which is the goal, of course. Okay, now obviously I have a lot more to do, but as you can tell, that's what it looked like before, where you couldn't even see through it. And now it's nice and open. So I can see my tomatoes that are still green, that are starting to turn, that have the darker blushing on them, and the ones that are ready. Yes, I did snack on a few while I was pulling them. And see over there, lots of light. Of course, I need to clear out this stuff too, but I didn't want to take too much of your time. So basically, I will be doing that around the whole bottom of my garden, which will be fun because I'll get to see a whole lot more tomatoes. Okay, now I'm gonna show you terminal end and top pruning. Just a moment. Okay, whew. It is hot today. I am not from the South or the East Coast or anything. I am not used to wet heat and I can't stand it. But anyways, so now I'm gonna talk to you about cutting off the flowers, which admittedly I should have cut before now, but that's okay. And then also the terminal bud. Now, if you've heard me use the term terminal bud, you might be thinking, what is she talking about? Well, basically the growing end. And so that depends on if you have, like, professional tomato growers grow single leaders. They cut off all of the suckers and the branching or whatever. I obviously let these ones go a little wild, as you can tell. And they grow them very tall. You know, their tomato plants, even in our area, will be like 10, 14 feet tall and just produce all these tomatoes. And they've got their, like, fertilizer and drip and all of that stuff really dialed in. They're in a heated greenhouse, like climate controlled, all of that, right? And so for their plants, it's easy to tell what is their terminal end because it's just the very top. For us, if you have a pretty tidy plant, it'll be a little easier. If you have a wild plant, you're going to have terminal ends. Obviously the one that is the furthest, the tallest or whatever, will be the one that really stands out. But ultimately, especially being September and all the green tomatoes that we all have, terminal ends just mean any end. So, and of course these are all jumbled, so it could be different plants, but both of these could be the terminal. I'm going to crawl up the ladder and go up north. But I wanted to give you an example because it'll be a little bit harder for me to show you when I'm on the ladder because I get a wee bit scared of falling. Though I'm not sure death by tomato is so bad. But so basically, let's say this is my tallest part of my tomato. This would be what is my terminal end. And so that means that this tip would control a lot of the hormone release and the growth and the overall everything for the tomato plant. Like I said, if we were in Mexico, this would just keep growing and growing and growing, and we would be eating a whole lot more tomatoes. But we're not. We're in the Pacific Northwest, and for me, western side of the mountains, which means I get less heat. And, you know, though we have a long growing season, it is not going to last for forever. So, of course, you're familiar with these, lots of little flowers. You want to remove all of those. Now, you can just pinch them like I did here. Or you could remove the tip. So what I like to do is I like to remove it back to the next fruit. And now one thing to keep in mind is that I'm growing Juliet here. And so these are a little bit large. They're between a gray, a teardrop cherry and a Roma. So they're kind of in between. So I have a better chance of ripening my tomato as opposed to somebody who's maybe growing beefsteaks. I don't grow any beefsteaks because they are so difficult. In the greenhouse, things are a little bit different, but for out here, it's really hard. Or you only get a couple, and I'd rather have the quantity or a bunch of littler tomatoes than one large tomato, if that makes sense. But anywho, so how far you take it back depends on what you have. So if you're trying to grow really, really large beefsteaks and you have a flower or even a small, like little green tomato that you know absolutely there's no way that he's going to turn into this huge tomato, cut him too. It's the best thing you can do for the ones that you want to ripen up. If you have cherry tomatoes, which are slightly smaller than this, you know, if you have flowers that haven't even ripened, yeah, those all need to go. But if you have even sometimes the little green ones that are just so tiny, again, this is more for folks with the bigger tomatoes. You just want to cut them, unfortunately. I know it hurts, I know it's sad, but they're never going to ripen in time anyways. You can always at any point cut them off the vine and take them in the fall, and that's the last ditch effort for whatever doesn't ripen up. But I'll be honest with you, the flavor is never there. It's really lacking. I mean, it is still homegrown, so it's better than a grocery store tomato. But anyways, so getting back to this, I think it's just out of the camera view. You could see these right here. So these are little tomatoes, and I don't think that they will have the time to ripen. But what I want to do, again, remember we're saying that this is our terminal end, and so you just snap it off. This one's a little bit harder. Oh, I snapped it just below. Actually, it didn't work well. When the branches come off a little bit easier, I do usually try and get out my snips if I'm going to the top, because I'll show you what happened. Okay. Put these away before I cut my leg. Okay. So this is what it looked like. And I tried to snap it, oops, right here. But what happened is that it ended up like shaving off this area. Now I don't really want to leave this exposed. I don't think it would actually do anything, but so I just made the snip a little bit lower. Now I did cut off some fruit, some tomatoes, as you could tell. And the reason for that is because you think about your tomatoes that have been here since like June or July, and it's September, I guess not June, but July, and it's now September, and they haven't turned green. These little guys here, they're not, or turned red, sorry. They're not turning red either. So basically, you want to come through. You should always sanitize your scissors, your snips. I never do, don't be like me. And just come through all these ones. See here, these have blooms, little flowers that haven't even opened yet. There's no way those stand a chance. And you just go through your garden and just kind of, just prune it. Just cutting off all the beautiful little flowers that could have been tomatoes or whatever. And again, depends on how many you have. But now I'm gonna go up top and try and show you that, because that's, oops, sorry, my camera fell behind. I have you like balanced on the ladder. I'm gonna take you up to the ladder and try and do my best to capture it. If I fall, you're not allowed to laugh. Hold on just a moment. Okay, I know it doesn't look like it, but I'm like 6 feet up, or well, 6 feet up on the ladder, which is a little bit scary to me, but no, I'm kidding. I was trying to fake like I fell, I didn't fall. Okay, so I'm up on top of the world, and I know it's zoomed in, but it's only me and the ladder. Okay, so this is a terminal end. This is the very top of the tomato. I am gonna make a quick little thing because I tied down his little leaf, putting the camera on it. But this is a terminal end. So I want to stop this to let the plant know, hey, stuff's going on. We're not gonna be focusing on growing. Let's ripen up what we already have. And I'm also gonna be getting all these flowers because again, there's no way they're going to. So the way that you prune the top really depends to like however you want. Up here, I don't know if you can see, let's see here. Up here, it's pretty wild. So I won't really be able to get each and every single one. Let's see if I can put the camera back down. Let's see, can you see me? Yeah, you can still see me. I won't be able to get each and every single one. But especially if you only have a few plants, it's a lot easier. I would take it all the way down to the top of just above where your viable fruit is. Now here, I'm already pruning from the bottom. I've got a lot of cages in here, those big concrete mesh cages I tell you guys about. So I'm just gonna go as far as I can see. So for me, that looks right there. All right, so there's where I made my snip. So you can see right there. And like I said, I use my fingers for the bottom trims, but up top, these guys are very strong. And so I use that. And so you can see here, cut off several leaves. The little, what's it called? Why am I forgetting words today? I'm sorry. The little, whatever those called, the little ones that offshoots or whatever. This one's a little bit bigger. There's a couple little mini fruit that's never gonna go anywhere. And then of course some flowers and then the tip. And I just throw that off. And then I would just keep doing that. So I don't know if you can see this here. We got the same thing. We got the growing terminal end. I'm gonna cut down. I don't see fruit, so I'm just gonna cut it right there. It did take a little bit of fruit off with it. That's okay, it's not gonna ripen anyways. I wanna save the ones that I can. And then I'll just keep doing that. Just cutting off, just pruning from the top, just throw them over. But anyways, and so you can see, so remember we're up high, but you can see, I think, I've got the camera turned so I can't really see what you can see, but hopefully you can see all those tomatoes. And so my goal is to cut it to about them. You can see some growing up here. And my goal My goal, I'm at the top of the ladder. My goal is to cut it to about that height and just watch them and get ready. I'm going to reduce their water. I'm going to trim them up real nice. Let them know, hey, glad you've been taking your time to hurry up. And then I'm going to harvest delicious tomatoes. If they don't all ripen up, I will take them in and ripen them off vine. But if you can ripen them on the vine, do that. So anyways, if you have any questions or any other tips or any other ways that anybody prefers, any time-tested things to ripen up green tomatoes, please share them with the group. If you've made it this far, super thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you want to give it a like or a comment or whatever, that always helps me. But happy gardening, and here's to ripening up our tomatoes. We're in it together. See you next time. Bye.